$700, $800 billion a year spent on healthcare associated with sort of the diseases of modern man, right? Arteriosclerosis, diabetes, various autoimmune diseases, et cetera. And so those are every one of those major, the sort of four horsemen diseases are mediated by inflammation. And I think by luck, what Megan and I did with Jackson, who was more or less an experiment for us, was try to find the lowest inflammation diet we could, based on some of the underlying lipid chemistry, which I understood from my studies, but mostly just observationally, because he was so sensitive to the things that we fed him that within hours he could have a clear and negative reaction to stuff that we fed him. And so for many, many years, we reverse engineered a diet where in one bucket was all the things that made him react terribly, and another bucket made him, more or less comfortable.
Welcome to the Kooler Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kuehlhorn, and I'm excited to have you join me as I interview community members and business leaders from the communities in which I live, work, and serve through my business Kooler Garage Doors. We're going to bring you highlights on characters in our communities. Why? Because community matters, and I want to know more about who is behind our business and leadership in order to understand and support the community fabric that our relationships make up. And collectively, we can build stronger communities that support our lifestyles, our youth, and our health.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Kooler Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kuehlhorn, and today I'm super fortunate to be hanging with Megan Reamer, founder of Jackson's Chips. She's beaming in from her home in Crested Butte. Megan, how are you?
I'm great, Matt. I just lost you for a second.
And we had some freezing.
Hold on. Can you hear me?
There we go. Yeah, now I can.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened there. It's like uploading. I'm doing great. Thank you. It's so great to be visiting with you today. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited to chat with you. I've known you for a number of years. My wife nannied for your beautiful children. And, I've been observing your journey with Jackson's Chips, and I want to talk about that a little bit in our conversation. But first, I'd love to get a better understanding of where you grew up.
Yeah, I just want to touch on what you mentioned, because we have known each other for a really long time, certainly pre any Jackson's Chips in business that we might talk about. Annie was one of our favorite nannies, babysitters, friends, however you want to put it, ever. And, we had a really great experience together as a family, working with Annie, meeting you, and certainly, having Annie join our family in the way that she did, because my kids were still really young. So she was so formative in their growth, in their experience, and in our life. So I really want to give a nice shout out to your wife as well.
She deserves it. She's awesome.
She does deserve it. I mean, she was a lifesaver for us in a lot of ways at a time that was still very hard for us with Jackson. So, we have a special place in our hearts for Annie. So I grew up in Santa Fe, actually, and I think that that really the story of this is going to sound really corny, because I don't want to say like my story starts with meeting Scott, but it kind of does a little bit, because my family and my background was and continues to be fantastic. Like I have an amazing family. I have 3 sisters. I'm the second of 4 girls. I have amazing parents, and just had a very loving, supportive, warm family that I can't say enough things about, who show up when things are good and show up even more when things are bad. So and it was very typical. And so I think why I mention maybe this adjustment or this difference when I met Scott, which was over 30 years ago when we were in college. We were really young. He was 19 and I was 20, So I think I just outed my age on the podcast, but I, Scott brought this different experience, and sort of nutritionally at the bare minimum, to me. So, right, I grew up like pretty typical, eating Ruffles and going to Burger King and, sort of very convenience food format. I wouldn't say it was junk food, but it was sort of like incorporating all those things, right? And I think our oldest daughter, Ella, who probably the best, would pride herself on saying, like, she's never eaten McDonald's. And I think it gets a little, self-righteous to people when she says it. But I think, some of that, certainly all of that analysis and reading a label and understanding, the ingredients in that came from Scott and me meeting Scott and sort of having this, I'm trying to like suck down a Diet Coke and Scott's giving me an alternative from the health food store when I was 20. And I thought,
Wow.
what's going on here? Like, what's wrong with my Diet Coke? Why can't I drink this? So that's sort of where I think the root of a lot of this story of what we might talk about today, or business and food, and how it became this very critical part of our lives early on, but certainly once we had Jackson and had to, get really creative about what we were doing to try to help and support him.
Hey everybody, this is Luke from Kooler Garage Doors. Just want to take a quick second to talk about our sponsor, Sommar Garage Door Openers. We believe Sommers are the best in the business when it comes to garage door openers. We always recommend them for residential installs because of the many features they have, such as Wi-Fi connectivity and safety features like a fixed chain that runs along a secure rail for a quiet and safe operation. Click the link to find out more about Sommar Garage Door Openers.
Yeah, I love this. And Scott, welcome. Thanks for joining.
Good to see you, Matt. Thanks so much for allowing me to participate.
It's nice to see you. Yeah, where did you grow up?
In upstate New York, north of New York City, about 2.5 hours, in the Hudson Valley, south of Albany, about maybe 15 miles or so. And back in the 70s and 80s, it was more or less just all farm country. Now it's more or less, particularly post-COVID, a bedroom community of Manhattan. There's more people that live in Manhattan, I think, in Columbia County, which was the county I lived in there, than natives anymore. But it was a wonderful place. It was actually the piece of trivia that we always used was the 8th president of the United States, Martin Van Buren, was born where I grew up. So has some history in the early development of the United States.
Yeah,
It's really beautiful.
Very cool. And
like, very old.
yeah, Megan mentioned your line on nutrition. Where does that come from?
The catalyst was my brother's girlfriend. My oldest brother's girlfriend is 10 years older than me. His girlfriend at the time, subsequently became his wife, that she had some friends that owned a health food store. And this is in I guess it would be in the early 80s, I guess maybe mid 80s, and early mid 80s. And I thought, wow, this is really unusual. I've sort of been a contrarian my whole life. And I thought, what is all this stuff? And then sort of the curiosity took over, and I started trying to understand, like, well, why would people buy this? And, asking questions of the people that own the store. And so it was really just a instinct to be contrarian, and then finding out the information effectively, like, hey, this is alternative and this is why it's better than, say, the Diet Coke that Megan was talking about. And then I was hooked at that point. I was a chemical engineer undergrad, and so I've always had this sort of instinct to try to understand the workings of whatever the heck it is around me. And so that was the first real sort of self-directed research I had done, and trying to understand, well, what are the sort of mechanisms of food? What is the biochemistry of food? And so, I said this to somebody, I can't remember whether it was one of my kids or not. Maybe, yeah, it was one of my kids actually this past weekend. We were at a hockey tournament. We were eating dinner with one of his friends, at a restaurant, and I said to him, we are nothing but a collection of chemical reactions, and those chemical reactions are powered by the food you eat. So the quality of your life is a function of the quality of your chemical reactions, and therefore the quality of the food you eat. And so I guess I've always sort of intuitively felt that. And then the health food, back then it was granola and that kind of stuff, but yogurt, whatever, wasn't nearly as advanced as now.
Right.
I just became a really interesting way to look at food as you are what you eat, obviously, but a little couple layers deeper. It's just about chemical reactions and the efficiency with which those happen, and the metabolites they throw off and all that sort of stuff. So it became super interesting from that perspective for me, and that was the hook, I think, for me to get interested in it.
Yeah, very cool. What's the concise or short, concise story? So you two met in college, and then ended up in Crested Butte. How did this valley find you, or you it?
Oh, I can answer that. We went to college on the East Coast, and we're living there. But one of Scott's roommate, one of our best friends mutually, grew up in Denver and grew up ski racing in Denver. And he, had traveled all over the circuit for many years growing up of mountain towns and ski areas. And, we came to visit him probably while we were still in college on one of the breaks. And he's like, oh, I have to take you to my favorite town ever. It's the best skiing. It's just like the best energy, and still a real mountain town. And this was probably in early 90s. And so we came here for the first time with him. And then, that was in the winter, that was to ski. Obviously, I think even at that time heard from somebody like, you have to come back in the summer. And we were living in New York City. Like we graduated from college, both worked for different companies in New York City. And, that I think just kept ringing in our head, like, let's go back. Let's go for 4th of July one year. And I think it was probably in 1995 or 96 that we came in the summer. And then, immediately we're like what everyone says, like, how do we get back here? What does that look like? How do we, kind of change our lifestyle from New York City? Things started for me to become very remote, even at that time with the job that I had, and more mobile. And so we moved to Denver in 1997, I think, and then 1998 maybe, and then quickly thereafter bought our house here in Crested Butte. And so we did that for a little while. And Jackson was born in 2001, so we were sort of just, bouncing between places for a little while, and then CV became our permanent place.
Yeah, beautiful. What do you love about the community of Crested Butte?
For me, I think it is very rooted in having this collective support in anything we needed to do at any time we needed to do it. So, and whatever that looked like. And so to sort of be a bit more specific about that, when we first came, we didn't have any kids, and we were remodeling this house that we still live in, and met this team of people and collection of people who worked on our house, who became our really good friends, right? The people who were painting our house, and the roofers, and anyone who was here. In fact, we had this really fantastic party at the end of that project, which came full circle for us recently, because we did it at the Bachnal, and Pete Nichols owned the Bachnal then, and Pete's son Mason plays hockey with Charlie. And so it was this funny kind of connecting the dots a little bit more recently. But at any rate, for us, there were, like, Crested Butte has always checked our boxes at different points in our lives, and for what we needed at that point in time. And so, pre-kids, a really great community that we could go out with, and friends, and just, have this really lovely lifestyle, and go to the lake and go skiing and all that stuff. And then, once we started to have kids and a family, it was, Tumblebugs and Munchkin Music, and, all of these other opportunities to meet other people with kids that are, the same age. But, to add in another layer, Jackson, I've kind of mentioned this a few times, but Jackson had this rare autoimmune disease that took 12 years to diagnose. And so that experience and that journey here in this valley for us was undeniably, unique and supportive and something that I don't think could have been replicated in other places with, just needing this people from all different parts of our lives, from UCC and from our friends and from other families, kind of pull together or even individually come to us and help support us through this really difficult experience. So, and that has just continued in different periods of our lives.
Sure. There's a couple questions that are competing. So I'll ask this one first. When did you fry the first potato?
Actually, we did it
When
just
did
for our
Jackson
business. We did it just for
ship,
ourselves. I can tell you the first bag that we sold was July 23rd, 2012, and it was at Mountain Earth here in CB. So I remember that because we had been making them at home for the kids and for their friends and for picnics and that kind of stuff, more or less for the previous 6 or 7 years. And so it was a homemade thing, and I actually don't remember the first time we ever did that. I should go back through my Amazon purchase history because it'll show me the mandolin that we bought. There's a very specific Japanese mandolin that are high quality grade that we bought. Once I stopped doing it with a knife, which was I only did it like once or twice.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this isn't going to work. And so I should look through that history, but it's got to be in the early aughts, 2006.
I was going to say,
2007.
yeah. I think even a little before that. I think it was like maybe 2004 when we started making them at home, and we initially were using lard to cook them, to fry them in, which is really fussy, and I wouldn't recommend it. It tastes great, just like, if you use lard in like a pie dough crust, right? Like if you're making crust from scratch, but it's fussy. It's not easy. Coconut oil is fussy too, but that's worse.
Yeah. So I love the continuum of going into nutrition and seeing the value of this early in life stages. And then with Jackson, his autoimmune, it almost drove the need to identify even more on the chemical level of nutrition. And out of this is the arrival of Jackson's chips, and that's where Jackson's legacy lives on. It's pretty interesting how that thread kind of sews through over the years.
I agree.
What would you like people to know?
Yeah, I agree. I think even like you lining it up like that, where you see this continuum, is really inherently something that I, of course, know. But to have you, share it in that way is really powerful for me.
I find it fascinating, and in these conversations, one of the observations I can make just being an observer is putting together this thread and this continuum, and it's pretty special. What would you like people to know about Jackson's chips and the mission behind the effort?
I'll take a stab at that if you don't
Scott,
mind.
do you want to?
I think
because I feel like I've been talking a lot here.
Yeah. Can I take a stab at that? I think the thing that was so powerful, I think I've read the statistic recently. It's something like $700-800 billion a year spent on healthcare associated with sort of the diseases of modern man, right? Arteriosclerosis, diabetes, various autoimmune diseases, et cetera. And so those are every one of those the sort of 4 horsemen diseases are mediated by inflammation. And I think by luck, what Megan and I did with Jackson, who was more or less an experiment for us, was try to find the lowest inflammation diet we could, based on some of the underlying lipid chemistry, which I understood from my studies, but mostly just observationally, because he was so sensitive to the things that we fed him that within hours he could have a a clear and negative reaction to stuff that we fed him. And so for many, many years, we reverse engineered a diet where in one bucket was all the things that made him react terribly, and another bucket made him, more or less comfortable, or at least less uncomfortable, maybe is the right description. And after a time, maybe 12, 18 months, we realized, gosh, the bucket that he can eat has got these sort of traditional ancestral fats. It's got some high quality vegetables, usually root vegetables. It's got some, diversity of proteins, for instance, but mostly fats and proteins, right? And then the other bucket was a lot of processed stuff, absolutely simple carbs, any sugar whatsoever. Certainly about half the fruits that are available, grapes, bananas, all made us go crazy because they're high in sugar. And so that's when the chemist in me sort of realized, gosh, what's the common denominator here of each of these buckets? And it came down to two things. One, sugar, the particularly high fructose corn syrup and, highly processed sugars. And then effectively polyunsaturated vegetable oils. Those were in the, absolutely do not feed him bucket. And what was in the feed him bucket were all these ancestral fats, and then good quality proteins and root vegetables. And so the power of that, having arrived at that observation, was pretty incredible for us. And it wasn't until, the PhD MDs at the National Institutes of Health who had an undiagnosed disease program that ultimately diagnosed Jackson's very rare orphan disease said, hey, you've reverse engineered the lowest inflammation diet you can give someone and still have them be healthy. Right. And no one had ever said that to us until the smartest people we had ever met said it to us. We were it was just this, for me personally, an incredibly profound moment where you felt like you were beating your head against the wall for all the other maybe hundreds of physicians that we had seen who said, well, that's not supposed to work, but I guess keep going. And so, but these guys said, no, like this, it works. And here's, you figured it out and here's why, that kind of stuff. And so my larger point in all of this is that reverse engineer diet, what we learned through Jackson's, many trials, because there were lots of times we did wrong stuff and he suffered for it, was that we could intermediate in a genetic disease using stuff you could buy at the grocery store. Instead of the $700 billion of pharmaceuticals and other things that are spent every year to intermediate in the inflammation process and all of these other diseases that we talked about, diabetes, arteriosclerosis, et cetera, we could intermediate in a very simple way. And it didn't cure him in any way, shape, or form, but it made his quality of life, which as parents, that's all we cared about. We just didn't want him to cry, right? We'd like him to occasionally smile. And Annie, just to close the loop there, was an incredibly important part of that particular process because she was there when it was happening and, she made him smile in so many ways. And so, her presence at that time was really important because it was when he was really starting to stabilize and have a, semi-normal life, a life that wasn't full of real suffering. And she was there for that. And it was an incredibly important moment for us as parents, but also for Jackson himself. And so that's one of the reasons we feel so bonded to that experience that we had with Annie, just to, so we've never verbalized that to you. But in any case, the idea that you could use food in specific ways to intermediate in a genetic disease, that's unbelievable. And we felt compelled that there was a responsibility to share that idea through the story, through the company and that sort of stuff. So everything we've done from the start to now has been animated by sharing that one particular insight.
Yeah, and I would only add, I would just add that, can I just add that, we've sort of danced around this a little bit, not intentionally, I think, but just I'll share that Jackson passed away from an experimental drug trial he was on in 2017, very unexpectedly, very suddenly and under some difficult circumstances. And so, for us to be able to focus and continue to say his name every day and share his story and have these opportunities like this, to talk about him and keep him alive has been, I think, all the difference for us. It's continued to provide the meaning and the purpose and the mission for us to keep going in a very difficult and tragic situation.
Yeah, thanks for adding that. I feel that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big, it is not the outcome that anyone was expecting in all the stuff we did for him, all of the support we gave him, and even the quality of his own health. He was really healthy. He lived in a wheelchair, but he was very happy and very healthy at a point, like once we got him stabilized, as Scott just discussed. But it was shocking and difficult. So it has been very meaningful to be able to continue to share, pieces of him through these other pieces of our lives that continue to exist.
Yeah. I can only imagine the journey that you've taken as entrepreneurs in forming Jackson's Chips, pushing it out to market. I can just imagine that the chip market in and of itself is likely highly competitive and hard to break in. And not only just break in, but Jackson's Chips seems to have disrupted it quite a bit. How important was it around the community, and what types of supports were there that you were unexpected by in developing Jackson's
It's a great
Chips?
question, actually, because we tapped into many resources in the Valley when we first started. I mean, we were making these by hand, so it was not this idea that we then took to a manufacturer and had them help us create. And in fact, the benefit of being able to do what we did, transitioning from a small commercial kitchen here to a large-scale manufacturing, probably only happened because we'd been making them by hand for such a long time. Wouldn't you say, Scott?
100%.
Yeah, he's shaking.
The co-packer we used only took us, and he was already at capacity, so there's no economic incentive for him to take on something as complex as what we were describing to him. He only did it, he said, because we had done it ourselves for some amount of time. He said, I get lots of folks showing up at my doorstep asking me to make, this, that, or the other potato chip, and I turn them all away because I got plenty of business, and, that's what's so compelling about it. But he said, that you two are parents, that you've done this for on your own already, you gave it a shot, and while you're doing it, I'll let you do a couple of runs here in Denver. And so the entrepreneurial journey you talked about is fraught with massive amounts of uncertainty, which we had been living with for 12 years, and not knowing what Jackson's disease was, not knowing it actually was the worst part, because we didn't know where to focus our efforts, and that was the most, at least personally, frustrating as parents. But living with that uncertainty and you probably know this for sure yourself, Matt, given you've gone from nothing to something huge in the Valley, you knowing that you're going to have massive amounts of uncertainty in starting any business, and being able to metabolize that, digest that, that's the trick of being an entrepreneur, is, knowing that you're likely to fail, knowing that you don't know all the answers, and yet you still go forward every single day and try to do it. And so Jackson's disease prepped us to be
madness,
entrepreneurs.
I think. Some would call that like sadistic, or I don't know, but I think that's a great positive spin, because you extend way outside your comfort zone, right, Matt? Like, oh my gosh,
That's right.
this is tough.
That's right.
But I think you answered that really well, Sky. We got a lot of lucky breaks in this experience, but it all started in this Valley, and it was buying potatoes from farmers in Paonia who would bring them every Sunday when they came over for the farmers market. It was, using space that Dana Zobs and Stacy Van Artem, who started CB Personal Chefs, they had a commercial kitchen at the Four-Way, and so we would hop in there at night when they were done cooking, and they allowed us to use that space. And we were like this traveling band with all of our coconut oil and our potatoes and our gear. We would go to the Fred Field Yeah, and our kids. We would go to the Fred Field kitchen in Gunnison and use that. It's a really lovely, wonderful commercial kitchen with a lot of space. And, wherever we were able to make them, we would, and bring our like vacuum sealer and put them in bags and seal them right there. So, and a lot of help from folks in the Valley who like threw a lot of potato slices in oil for us and, really gave us a lot of support. And Cindy at Mountain Earth, beautiful. And Terry at Gunnison Vitamin, right? Like, yeah, sure. We'll take these bags and see if anybody likes them and wants to buy them. And, 2 days later, they both called and said, we need more. Like, people really like these. And we had, it had taken us like 3 weeks to make probably 50 small bags, just trying to find time to do that with our family. So it was a really special validation for us locally that people liked them and wanted to buy them, and really provided the impetus for us to keep going.
I love that. The stories of entrepreneurialism is so diverse, and the uncertainty that you mentioned is there the entire time. And so I honor your grit. And I also see the mission behind it, and it's the legacy, and that is part of the fuel that keeps it moving. You have a beautiful website. There's a clip of you two on Shark Tank on that website, which is a really fun clip to watch. Where is Jackson's Chips today?
Jackson's Chips is doing really well, actually. We now have our own manufacturing plant, and that has made all the difference, really. The challenge we ran into, we grew very quickly with a lot of different products. The challenge on that is capital, right? Like having the right amount of cash to support that kind of growth. But tied into that very closely for us were the economics around using an outside manufacturer to make our products. We were limited in the type of products we could make, the type of formats, like a multi-pack box or bag, or just even a certain snack size, right? Like it had to be 1.5 ounce versus a 1/2 ounce or 1 ounce, and so we were restricted by what we were able to do and the amount of time we had to produce because of our co-packer, and having our own manufacturing facility and the investors who believed in that opportunity and invested in building that out has made all the difference. Like really kind of, I'd say, catalyzed the business from one level to probably 2 or 3 above it, just by having those pieces in place. And so, we're nationally distributed. We're working with retailers around the country. Whole Foods being, still a very important partner for us. They were for us right at the beginning, and they continue to be. And so we sell nationally through Whole Foods, as well as other very big regional grocery stores and online. And so we're focused right now only on sweet potato chips. And we cook them in coconut oil, and we've also started cooking them in avocado oil. And, those ingredients really line up still for people who are looking for a really clean, healthy alternative to something they really enjoy. Like people like crunchy, salty things and want to feel good about eating them. So the business is doing really well and thriving, I would say.
Awesome. What are you two excited about over the next few years?
I think continuing to grow the business for me, I am. It's really fun to be part of that, and exciting because we're still finding a lot of opportunities for that growth, and that feels like this scrappy startup to me still, and that's really exciting to stand something up from nothing and create the process and create the success. And there are a lot of failures along the way and lessons learned, and that's part of life too. So I think, for me, it's still being part of the business, continuing to raise our family in this valley. They're all, our kids are all thriving and launching and sort of embracing the phases of their lives here, and that's very rewarding and fun to experience with them.
Yeah, and for me, Matt, I would just say that from a Jackson's standpoint, it's the capabilities that we now have that we didn't have before. We were operating, sometimes with two hands tied behind our back. One, from a capital standpoint, as Megan had mentioned, we ran into some real capital challenges multiple times throughout that growth journey that she mentioned. And then also the other big challenge was, not owning our own manufacturing facility and having to beg, borrow, and steal for co-packers, co-manufacturers that we would rent their space from them to make some of our products around the country. And indeed, even in Canada, it was a super challenge to do that. It restricted the things we could do, the products we could make, how much we could make, when we could make them, how we would make them, what packaging, what boxes they would go into. And so what we've come to realize from a capability standpoint is owning your own facility allows you to effectively be much, much better partners with the retailers and distributors that ultimately are the choke point for all food CPG businesses. At the end of the day, that product, whatever you're making, has to find its way economically in the right package at the right price point with the right marketing and boxing and all that sort of stuff to some place where consumers are going to buy it. And that was we could never optimize that or frankly even serve it properly without having our own facility. And so now people over the next year are going to see explosion in where our products can be bought, at what price point they can be bought, what format. So bigger bags, regular size bags, and then the small snack size bags, and in various sort of combinations within boxes. So Costco and Sam's Club. And so all of these things were unavailable to us before simply because we didn't have our own facility and we couldn't control those variables. Now we can, and the retail business, as you had intuited earlier, incredibly competitive. And so now that we can compete on that basis, we're now going head to head and winning in many respects against some very, very large brands that have been around for many, many decades. And that feels great. It's like we can actually sort of use two hands in this business, whereas before we used one and sometimes none.
Yeah, I love this story. I really appreciate your passion, your willingness to open up and share with us today. As we close out and round out this conversation, I know we'll have more, and I have tons more questions. I'm going to start an entrepreneurial show at one point, and
Great.
I'd love to know more of that journey. But for folks listening, where can we find and follow the story?
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned the website. That's a great place. Certainly our social media accounts. And, I'd say those are probably the two best places to at least understand the business story. And then, of course, I think people stop us a lot and refer to us as the chip people in town and in this valley, right? Oh, you guys are the chip people. Yeah. Like, great. And so I get stopped a lot asking, how things are going and just showing support for us, which is really lovely and warms my heart. So
yeah, Matt,
I hope that continues.
A good anecdote, Matt. Just this past Tuesday, I was playing sort of beer league hockey in CB South at the outdoor rink, and at the end of it, everyone's in the locker room getting changed. And I hadn't met the vast majority of the other players, and they didn't quite know who I was, and I was making introductions, and then I realized after just saying who I was that they didn't really know me that well. I was like, oh, actually, you know my wife and I from Jackson's chips, and they're like, everybody was like, oh, you're the chip guy. So it's exactly what Megan has said. Everyone knows the chips. They didn't associate me with it, but once I said the chips, it was kind of this great icebreaker, and all of a sudden everybody knew my story and knew about Jackson and that sort of stuff. So it was a really wonderful anecdote to what you had just asked about the community and about how supportive everyone has been historically and now still are.
Yeah, I love it. We'll include the social handles and the website in our show notes, so folks listening can jump on, follow. Megan and Scott, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank
Cheers.
you, Matt. Thanks for having us.